Hello, my name is Dr. Jennifer Percival, and today we're going to be talking about pre-employment strategies and tips for employability in the classroom. We want to start with some of the statistics. In 2010, the U.S. Census identified that 19% of the United States population has a disability, with more than half reporting that the disability was severe. People with disabilities that are within working age are unemployed at a rate of at least 59%, with that number changing consistently over time. The 2014 National Core Indicators data showed only 16% of people with developmental disabilities are employed in a community setting. Unfortunately, that data is not disaggregated for different disability groups. It's important to note that certain disability groups may have a different unemployment rate than others. So why are people with disabilities having difficulty being hired? There are many areas that we're going to discuss today to answer that question. Job matching and insufficient exploration is one area. Bias by an interviewer or HR professional, or professionals that are not skilled or knowledgeable about interviewing people with different disabilities. Some social difficulties, occasionally appearance or hygiene, lack of previous work experience, and challenges communicating their strengths effectively, especially in their interview process. What do employers want in an employee? So when we're looking at talking to students about how to make good job choices and how to be a good employee, we want to look at these three areas: flexibility, availability, and reliability. When we're talking about the universal hiring rule, and this comes from a CareerSource DEI quote in 2016, they share that an employer will hire an applicant as long as she or he believes it will bring more profit than cost to their business. This is important, especially when we talk to families of our students, because sometimes families believe that an employer should hire their student or their adult child just because they need a job. Well, unfortunately, the employer needs to make sure that it's going to be beneficial to their business. And so we really want to sort of drive home to our families and to our students that businesses need to make money, and they're not employing people because they feel like employing people. It's because it needs to actually bring a profit to their business. So how do we get there? When we're working with our students, we want to start with pre-employment. And these are things that we can integrate into classroom experiences. So we want to talk about career exploration and what kind of accommodations we can request at a job. We want to be preparing for a job search. And these are things that we can do very early on. We can start that preparation in early high school. We can even do some of those career exploration tasks in middle school. We want to discuss resume development. We're going to talk about the different kinds of resumes that are available for students to create. And we really want to work on those social skills for interviewing, and then social skills for the employment workplace as well. So we're talking about exploration. We're talking about different ways of kind of finding out what we're good at, what challenges we have, and what areas we really want to pursue on a vocational course. So there are a few ways to explore our vocational interests, and one of them would be with a vocational evaluation. The school district actually offers vocational evaluations for our students. There's a wonderful woman there named Meryl Turkowitz, and she works out of the Palm Beach County School District, and she provides vocational evaluations through the school. An organization called Vocational Rehabilitation can also provide vocational evaluations. We're going to talk more about vocational rehabilitation at the end of this training. And vocational evaluation actually provides a career scope inventory. It asks students what their interests are, and not just what their career interests are, because sometimes students don't really have an actual idea of what they want to do. They might have a concept that they either want to work with people, or they want to work alone, that they want to work with animals, or that maybe they want to work in technology. So they might have some fields that they're interested in, but the vocational evaluation process is going to dig deeper. For our students that need an even deeper process, there's something called the discovery process. And while a vocational evaluation may last only a few days, the discovery process can last weeks or even months. And the discovery process is where that evaluator will go into the home, they'll go into a workplace setting, they might even go into the school, and they can really observe that student and say, okay, this is someone who has certain skills that can be transferable into an employment setting. Some other ways that we can start the exploration in the classroom is by using things like career scope or other interest inventories. Have students start answering questions about what they're interested in. A really excellent way of looking at different jobs is through volunteering or unpaid work experience. Sometimes our students get frustrated when we recommend this. However, it is really important to sort of close that experience gap. When we're talking about an experience gap, we're talking about those students that say things like, I want to be a video game designer. Well, they're thinking that they're going to get paid to play video games all day. And the reality is, to be a video game designer requires math skills, coding skills, graphic design skills. It's not being paid to play video games. So we want to close those sort of knowledge gaps, those experiences gaps, with things like volunteering and unpaid work experience. It's important for our students to go out there and really explore what they want to do and really actually see those jobs firsthand in the job site, in the work environment. I've had students that say they want to work with animals, and they go volunteer in an animal shelter, and they don't realize that they're going to spend a lot of time like cleaning out cages or cleaning the animals. They really just wanted to get paid to take animals on walks. Now there's, plenty of like dog sitting jobs that might provide that sort of opportunity, but they needed to be able to differentiate, exactly what those jobs look like and what the requirements would be for those different types of experiences and those different types of environments. Community-based work experience is also great. That's offered through many of our schools, where students are able to, experience different types of jobs over the semester. In pre-COVID times, we had students that would go out and they would maybe work for a few weeks in a restaurant setting or a hospitality setting, a hotel, or maybe even a medical setting, a library setting, where they can go out and actually see what those jobs look like and feel like in the actual environment. Other ways of exploring are school courses. Sometimes families think that students, have to take a full class in order to, understand exactly, what is being offered in that course. But, many students will audit a course or take something pass-fail. College classes can be audited. They don't have to be degree-seeking students to do that. You can be a non-degree seeking student and you can audit a class. You can go take Photography 101 and see if that's a field that you might be interested in. So that's an important avenue as well. And then clubs, activities, and other community experiences. So clubs are a really great way to find out if you want to do something. There's lots of clubs within that high school environment, within a college environment, clubs that are focused on volunteering, giving back, community service. Those are really great ways to get out into the community and actually work in those community settings. And then travel is also a really good way for our students to experience different environments and to sort of work through some of those flexibility issues. Sometimes our students really do well in, sort of more rigid environments with strict schedules and ways that, they can sort of depend on how their day is going to go. But travel can help sort of learn how to be a little bit more flexible in environments. And that's going to be important on a job site where, those environments are a little less controllable. Another thing we want to look at is importance of fit. So we talk about interests, and we're talking about going out and experiencing the world and doing some of those evaluations. But then we also want to look at ability and environmental match. The abilities part is a little bit easier than the environmental match. The abilities, we can look at what students do well in school, where their strengths lie. Maybe they're strong in math, but not in science. Maybe they're strong in a writing class, but they're not so good in art class. So we want to look at those different abilities. The environmental match is a piece that I think most families and students really don't consider. You might have a young adult that's very good at sales. Maybe you're very good at talking somebody into buying something, but maybe they're only good at it when it's not a pressure situation, where if they had to make 10 sales a week or 10 sales a day, it might be a lot more difficult for them. So we want to look at that environment. There are people that are very interested in working in tourism or hospitality, and they might do better at the front desk of a hotel, where maybe it's a little bit quieter or people coming in groups versus, checking people in for a cruise ship, where it's very, very stressful for, 4 or 5 hours, and then there really isn't a lot to do the rest of the time. So you really want to look at that environment and how that's going to be impactful. The other thing we want to do is really take advantage of all opportunities. There are many different areas of life, especially as our students transition from being high school aged to middle school aged into that adult, aspect of life. And when we're looking at transition, this is a transition wheel. We're looking at the different areas that our students really need to be able to manage or excel in, or have the help that they need in order to make sure that these things are stable for them. And those areas are employment, which is what we're primarily speaking about today. But what goes along with that is independent living skills, safety, continuing education or training they may need to maintain their employment, recreation and leisure. And that's important to develop those social and relational skills. And then also financial. And some of our students, they will need some financial support over time, but it's really important to make sure that we're building in those skills as early as possible. Even for students and adults that need financial support, we want to make sure that they're able to ask the right questions and be able to at least manage basic money, learn how to do budgeting, and be able to take a budget and go to the grocery store and be able to buy groceries for several days with a certain amount of money. So those are all important things that we need to be looking at over time with our students as we're developing pre-employment, but also independent living skills for adulthood. All of these things take practice and they take time. And for our students, sometimes they take a little bit more time. So that's why we want to start sort of as early as possible. And there are things that we can do with our students that are in middle school as well as in high school. We can start working on budgeting. We can start looking at different employment opportunities and developing those interests. We can work on our recreation and leisure skills, even at very early ages. So when we're looking at employment, sometimes our young adults, our students will say, well, I've worked, but this is not what I want to do. So what we want to talk about now is transferable skills. So there are lots of things that can transfer from maybe a job that we would consider more of a high school job into something that, could be a career. So when we look at some of these areas, we can think about things like babysitting, a young adult that babysits their neighbors or babysits a sibling. They might be interested in childcare or being a camp counselor, and those are jobs that can become careers. Somebody who likes to walk dogs, they might be interested in animal care. People that like to volunteer and sort of give back to the community, maybe give back to underserved populations, they might be interested in social services. Again, there's that childcare, camp counseling, might be a teacher or an assistant teacher or recreation leader. There are lots of different ways where we can transfer some of those skills that we develop, especially more in youth, into careers and places where we can build them into, kind of combining our interests and our abilities and taking them on a longer pathway. When we're looking at that pre-employment piece, we want to look at that qualified versus capable aspect. So in an interview, the ADA says that we're not allowed to ask about a disability. Now, we do see that on lots of job applications, and applicants have the option to disclose or not disclose. Typically what we suggest about disclosure is if you can get through the interview without disclosing, it's probably better to do that and then disclose during orientation or to an HR person if you're going to need accommodations at the job. If you're going to struggle during the interview, if it's very hard for a person to shake a hand or make eye contact, it might be better to disclose before the interview in order to have accommodations throughout the interview. So those are important things. Now, interviewers are allowed to ask questions that are related to those essential functions of the position. And that's important because those essential functions are sometimes the things that can unfortunately stop our young adults. So they may be able to ask for a stocking position, can you lift 50 pounds? Now, that student may be able to lift 20 pounds, and that would certainly be sufficient enough for most, stocking positions at a grocery store, but it may not be. So it's important to really read those essential functions. And as we're teaching our students to look for jobs, we need to also be teaching them how to read the job openings and job descriptions. It's really important that they go in sort of knowing what is going to be expected of them. Some of the most difficult job experiences that we've had to support young adults and students through is where they get the job, they get on the job, that job is not really a good fit for them, and then they either lose that job or they feel like they need to walk away from that position. And unfortunately, that can be very, very troubling for people, especially if they're fired because they couldn't complete those essential functions of the position. And sometimes they get really discouraged to go after another job. So it's really important to have as best of an understanding of the position as possible before applying. So when we talk to students about what kind of accommodations they could expect on a job, we can lead them to JAN, which is the Job Accommodations Network. This is an excellent website, and I strongly recommend going through this website with students, with parents. And if you're listening to this and you're a job coach or an employment specialist, working through this with an HR representative from whatever company your student gets hired at, because it's really important. A lot of HR specialists and a lot of businesses don't know the different types of accommodations that are available, and they don't really know where to start. And JAN is an excellent place to start. Those accommodations can include many things. They could include certain equipment, modifications to the environment, possibly flexible scheduling, or even flexible job tasks. And here is the website for JAN. Once you're on the JAN website, I strongly suggest going into the searchable online accommodations resource page called SOAR. And you can actually select the disability and select some of the limitations within that disability. And then you can select the job function. So let's say we're selecting social abilities. And then maybe even you can drill down even further. And so this person might need help working effectively with supervisors. And so then it recommends things, communicating one-on-one, dealing with problems as they arise, keeping the job coach informed. This is really excellent because it gives both the individual, the employee, the family, the business, the manager, the HR representatives, really concrete suggestions. It's not sort of too conceptual. It's very concrete. They say, okay, this is the person's disability. This is what they're struggling with. These are some solutions to that. And then also JAN has a 1-800 number you can call. The business can call and they can talk to somebody over the phone. So when we're looking at that job search, we want to start preparing our students, again, as early as possible. Preparing for a job can be a long process. And these are many things we can start doing with our students early on. And these are things that we can practice with them and then also have them sort of ready to go as they're graduating or aging out of your programs. We're going to talk about some of the logistics of job searching, our internet presence. And these are things, especially our young adults, kind of forget that exists. Once you put it out on the internet, it's there forever. Networking, gathering references, and how to do targeted search. So this is actually sort of a fun activity that can be done in the classroom. So when we're talking about some logistics, we want to look at phone messages. There are many young adults that call us, call into CARD, ask us questions. We call them back and you can't understand them on the message. You don't even know if that's who you've reached, or they have very loud music playing in the background, or there's a dog barking. So we really want to make sure that our own voicemails, our students' voicemails, sound professional. It is absolutely essential. So this is a fun task to work on with students, because they can write out a script or practice a script, and they can then record it onto their own phones. They can call each other and listen to the voice messages to see if they sound professional or not. You can create all sorts of different types of voice messages. There are just a couple of samples here. And this is a really neat way to again, start changing, that informal to a little more formal sort of aspect of life. Some of that piece of being an adult, and assuming that, an employer is going to call the student back. They're not going to call mom to schedule an interview. And we really don't want them calling mom to schedule an interview. We want them to call the person applying for the job. So for phone message tips, the other thing that's important for students to practice is checking their voicemail every day. And that might be, again, something that you can do in a classroom where, maybe part of the warm up in that class or during that unit is, let's everyone check your voicemail. And maybe students can even leave, pretend messages from, employers on different voicemails so that students can practice writing down the name of the employer, their title, and their contact information. And that's really important too. Sometimes messages expire, sometimes voicemail boxes are full. So we want students to be practicing, if they got a message from maybe a manager at Publix, who called, what was their number, what was their location? There's a Publix every 1.5 miles here in Florida. So it's important for students to write down the information very carefully, and that's something that they can practice and learn how to do. Again, students also need to learn, you need to clean out those voicemail boxes. If a potential employer can't leave you a message, they're going to go on to the next application. So it's important to do that. And then students can also actually practice leaving voicemail messages. Sometimes you might need to call an HR representative and say, hey, did you get my application? Do you need a copy of my resume? And how can we leave those messages? Making sure we leave our full name and our phone number so that that person calls us back. Another logistical aspect we can work on is email. A lot of our students, they have email addresses, but those email addresses are usually used for things that are fun. So we might have students that have an email address, so ilovebears@gmail.com or Happy Giraffe or something that is fun or maybe related to online gaming or something that is maybe even inappropriate. So we want our students to be creating email addresses that are job appropriate. And those email addresses and those email accounts are the emails that they would use for their job search. That, you don't want to set up, your LinkedIn or your Indeed account with happygiraffe@aol.com. That's not going to work for most employers. And as someone who has hired before, and has done quite a bit of hiring for the state of Florida, I have seen some email addresses that have made me want to go on to the next person, regardless of their credentials, because they were completely inappropriate. So it's important, first name, last name at Gmail. Gmail is free, Yahoo is free, AOL is free. There's lots of opportunities. My email address is jpollock@fau.edu. So real straightforward, professional, and we can have our students set those up so they're ready to go with those accounts. The other thing that's important for students to have and to create and to have already put together as a Word document or a saved email so that they don't have to create it on the spot. And again, this is something we can create in a classroom together, is writing those professional emails, writing a cover letter, but also just writing a 3 or 4 sentence email to the hiring manager, to the hiring committee, to the HR representative, that says, hello, my name is blah, blah, blah. I applied for a certain job today. Thank you for the opportunity. Or my resume is attached. Thank you for reaching out to me. That includes the contact information and, is a professional email. We can also create those as thank you notes for after an interview. Something else we want to really help our students with is their internet presence. A fun task to work on in a classroom is to Google yourself. I've heard sort of a story through the grapevine of an individual who kept applying for jobs but couldn't figure out why he wasn't getting hired. And it turned out there was somebody else with his same name that had committed a pretty offensive crime. And every time the employer saw his name, they were finding information about that crime. And so he wasn't getting hired. So what that person did was just add their middle initial to everything, and that erased the problem. So it's sort of important to Google your own name, have students Google themselves, see if there are other people out there with their name, and make sure that if there is somebody out there with their same name that might have some sort of sordid past, that they, add their middle initial to their resume and to their applications when they're seeking a job, just to make sure they're differentiating themselves. The other thing is sometimes our students will post and they don't realize those posts are there forever. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, it goes on and on. There are certainly students that have been accepted to colleges, but then they've posted something online that was not appropriate, and those colleges have taken back those application offers. It certainly happens with or admissions offers. It certainly happens with jobs as well. So it's really important. I would encourage, again, even as a classroom activity, go through whatever social media accounts your students have and have them, number one, put on privacy settings so that they're not open to the world, but then also to go through and delete anything that may not be entirely appropriate. When job seeking, that's really important. Also to go through, especially LinkedIn, and make sure that everything on there is work related or something that's going to be a transferable skill. Your LinkedIn objective shouldn't say my objective is to go surfing every weekend. It should be something that is work related. Networking. We're going to talk a few minutes about networking because sometimes that can be a challenge. So this is sort of a fun activity, and this is something you can create as a worksheet. So this is the sort of who do I know and where do I go aspect of networking. So if you talk about networking to a 15-year-old or a 16-year-old, they're like, well, I don't know anybody who, owns a business. I don't know anybody who's hiring. Well, actually, they probably do, or they know somebody who knows somebody. So when we talk about who do I know, we want to write down family. Maybe our Uncle Joe, he might own a restaurant, or maybe his neighbor owns a restaurant, and maybe that neighbor is hiring him because they know Uncle Joe. You can get an interview. That student can be introduced. So when we're talking about the who do I know, we want to talk about family, friends, parents, grandparents, neighbors, teachers, coaches, religious leaders. We know a lot more people than we tend to think we do. Even just going into the grocery store, we might see the same manager every single week for 5 years, and that manager might be the one who is the one in charge of hiring. So it's important to sort of look at who do I know? This is the first step of networking. And then where do I go? Most students and young adults are going places, whether they're going individually, with a group, with their family, with a club, with an activity, going to the grocery store, going into the mall. And obviously a lot of this is pre-COVID, but maybe going to a movie theater, bowling alley, doctor, dentist, different kind of therapy offices. Where do I go? And writing those things down, because those are all opportunities for jobs. When we're talking about actually gathering references, so we've got a job and now we're going to, job interview, now we're going to need a reference. So oftentimes when I talk to young adults, I say, okay, well, who's going to be a reference? Well, they say, Mom. No, Mom's not going to be a reference. Your family can't be a reference. And they say, okay, well, my friend, Bob is going to be my reference. No, your friend Bob can't be a reference. References need to be teachers, maybe a volunteer supervisor, club leader, activity leaders. They need to be people that are adults, and they need to be adults that are in some sort of usually supervisory type role. Again, whether that is a teacher, whether that is a club leader, somebody that can speak to their character and to their reliability, their attendance, their contribution. And developing references does take time. One thing that's important that sometimes our young adults forget is they'll put down maybe a teacher or a principal or an activity leader or club leader as a reference down on an application, but they won't tell that reference that they've put them down. So we need to ask, and this is something, again, that can be practiced in a classroom. This is an email that can be created. We need to teach our students to ask permission. They need to ask that reference. They need to say, hey, I'm going out and applying for jobs. Do you mind if I put you down as a reference? And if they say yes, then we need to ask their preferred contact information. So that person might want to use their personal cell phone, or they might not want to use their personal cell phone and use their work email address or their work phone number. And that's important. The other thing we want to make sure that we're suggesting that students do is before they leave high school, that they ask for letters of recommendations or letters of reference. This is something that happens for most students that are on a college track because they're asking for those letters as part of their college application process. For students that are not on a college track, this sometimes gets forgotten. And it's very hard when several years later, they say, oh, I was, in this club, and I was really great in this class or this class. Okay, well, you need to now go find that teacher to write you a letter. And it's years later, maybe that teacher has changed schools. Maybe that teacher doesn't remember that student that well. Maybe that teacher is retired. So it's really important in these areas where students are really excelling or contributing. If a student volunteers a lot around the school or is maybe a student assistant in the main office, they need to have that letter of recommendation before they walk out of the door, before they graduate. It's really important to have those. And like I said, this very typically gets done for students that are on a college track because they need 3 or 4 recommendation letters for those college applications. But for our students who are not applying for college, as part of their graduation process, sometimes these letters do not happen. And this is a very important piece that really needs to be happening. Other job search techniques are going to be word of mouth. When we're talking about that networking, even talking to those teachers, talking to the people we're asking those letters of recommendations from, asking employers, are they hiring? Most jobs are found through friends and family. A lot of people get hired because they know somebody. Another job search technique is really going direct to employer. So again, you go into that grocery store every week because you're grocery shopping with a parent, and now it's time to look for a job, and you're looking for a part-time job, maybe at that grocery store. It's the one closest to the house, and that's where we want to work. That's where we're comfortable. You go and you talk to the manager and say, are you hiring? Sometimes job openings are never advertised. The other thing we can do is we can search online for jobs. However, this is something that we really need to talk through with our students. Job searching online, sometimes there are jobs that are not necessarily on the up and up. So we need to make sure that we've learned how to differentiate jobs that may be not such great situations, or jobs that might be very heavily commission based, companies that, might be not necessarily safe. So it's important to really kind of practice those skills as well. And there's lots of different job search sites that we recommend. Again, some of these you have to be very careful because every kind of job on the planet is there. And those are sort of your more general job search sites. Now, going direct to employer, that's going to be probably a safer bet for a lot of our young adults and our students. If they want a job at Publix, you go to the Publix website. If you want a job at Home Depot, you go to the Home Depot website. If you want a job at FAU, you go to the FAU website. There are also government websites for state of Florida jobs or federal government jobs. So now we're going to talk a little bit about resume development. And this is something that can be lots of fun. And there's lots of ways to create a resume. And this is something we definitely should be doing and can be doing in those high school classrooms. Again, we can even start them as early as middle school. There are some students that might be job searching at 15 or 16 that are going to need those resumes early on. These resumes are also good for applying for college programs, technical programs, vocational programs, scholarships. So it's important that we put them together on the earlier side. So things to include on a resume. So we want to guide our students to definitely document those things that are sort of typical. So where did we go to school? What kind of diploma are we earning or degree? What is our work experience, paid and unpaid? And then we want to look at all those things that sometimes we forget to put down on our resumes. So things like internships, community-based work experience through high school, even things like job shadowing days. It's just important to show that we were involved with those aspects of looking for a job and exploring careers. Those volunteer experiences, even those community service hours for school, students need community service hours to graduate, so they should have some volunteer experience. Those things go on a resume. Awards or recognition, and those can range. Awards could be, something like a perfect attendance award at school or a recognition for being outstanding in some particular area. We want to include our clubs. We want to include sports, extracurricular activities, and then family outings, including travel. So if that student has traveled at all, especially if it has to do with that job. Any kind of special talents also go on a resume. A student can speak a foreign language. They've got some sort of particular skill in technology, art, music. We want to make sure all of those things are going onto the resume. So a lot of students will ask me, well, what if I don't have work experience? So sometimes people don't realize that they actually do have work experience. Maybe a student has been paid to babysit. Maybe they've been paid to mow the neighbor's lawn or look after the neighbor's cat while they're out of town. Those things count. Most of our students and young adults have some sort of work experience, whether that's community-based work experience through school, some sort of internship program, on-the-job training, even pre-employment trainings can definitely count as some work experience. And if they don't, we need to encourage our students to be volunteering. So we want to document, save everything. Again, this is one of those things that tends to happen for students that are on a college track where they're putting together those college applications, but then sometimes does not happen for our students not on the college track. And it needs to. This needs to happen for everybody. And it needs to happen along the way. If parents are listening or getting guidance from the school, they need to create a folder, and not just that IEP folder, 504 folder. They need to create this kind of folder that has all of these awards, papers, recommendation letters, positive notes, emails, those emails that even say, hey, you're, from a teacher or principal or somebody at school, hey, your child did this great thing today. They need to be saved. Any kind of participation, activities, skills, anything that supports who they are and what they've been up to. If they've taken a class, an art class, painting class, any kind of course, all of that information needs to be saved. It is better to save it, keep it all in one place, than start trying to put it together after the fact. I've worked with many families where now that student is 24 or 25. They're applying for some sort of program or some sort of job, and now we're trying to piece together the last 10 years, and it's very hard to do. It's really important to do it as we go along. And here's part of the reason we do it, is because there are lots of different types of resumes. So we're going to talk about your traditional paper resume, but then also your portfolio and the video resume. So there are a few different types of paper resumes. So we have our sort of traditional chronological paper resume. And that's going to start with work experience and education. And those are very good resumes for people that have strong work experience. For our students and young adults that do not have a lot of work experience, we want to focus on skills instead of work experience. And that's going to be a functional resume. And those functional resume highlight those skills, and they really target the job that that person is applying for. So let's say they're applying to be someone who stocks the shelves at Publix. It's important to indicate if that person is organized. Are they timely? Can they manage lots of tasks at once? Those are things that we want to put down as functional skills, and that will take place of work history on the resume. And then if somebody has a little bit of both, then we can do a combination resume that is a little bit of chronological and a little bit of functional. So maybe an individual, a student has maybe one job, history, one job in their history. And so they want to put down that one job, but then they also want to put down their skills and their abilities so that all of that ends up on the resume. When we're looking at resumes, there's lots of different ways to put together those sort of less typical resumes. So we've got, the paper resume, which is very traditional. And then we also have these portfolios. So a portfolio can be as simple as a 3-ring binder that has all of our documents over time. And what I recommend with those binders is that those are, sort of solid color binders. You can buy nicer ones, Walmart, Target, everybody sells them, and use plastic pages so that you don't have to put hole punches in those documents that you're trying to save. And to always use photocopies of those documents, because sometimes if you hand a portfolio to a potential employer, they don't hand it back. So it's important to always use copies. Another option is a photo portfolio. And actually hadn't seen this until a family came in with one where they put everything together in a photo book. So the way of documenting that young adult sort of history and abilities was done through pictures. And they had taken pictures of the different skills that that individual had of them actually doing those things. And they put together in a photo book, which I thought was a really neat way of creating a portfolio. And then there's also video portfolios, and we're going to look at a sample of one here in just a minute. And video portfolios are really neat, especially now with sort of modern technology, and we can just record videos on our phones. So if you record videos over time of a student or young adult doing certain tasks, that would be a way to actually show a potential employer, that they're able to do those things. And in our portfolios, we want to include that resume, cover letter, introduction, any sort of certificates, licensures, diplomas, any sort of acknowledgments we want to put in there. So now this is a video portfolio. So that is just a great example of a video resume. And as you can see, it really showed all the skills, the abilities, the interest areas, and showed him actually doing all of those things, which is a really great way of showing those abilities to an employer. So the next thing we're going to talk about is soft skills for interviewing. So it's really important for our students to be practicing those soft skills, because sometimes this is where they get tripped up in the interviewing process. I love these videos by Snagajob. It talks about, they have a whole series of them. These are great for the classroom if you're going to talk about pre-employment, but I think these are just lots of fun. So this video actually talks about how not to get a job and interview. Again, so I love the videos by Snagajob. They've got lots of different ones. But that one, looking at those soft skills, really important to act professional, and to teach our students how to answer those phone calls and to respond during interviews. And those are all things that can be role played and practiced in a classroom, and should be done over time so that they really sink in. Before the interview, we can make checklists for our students. We need to have professional clothing. We need to have that hygiene checklist ready. We need to shower that morning and make sure our hair is brushed, make sure our teeth are brushed, make sure we figured out our transportation. If a student is going to take public transportation, perhaps practicing before the interview, the day before, 2 days before, what is the bus route? How long is it really going to take me to get there so that I can be sure that I'm on time? Making sure we have our documents put together. So having that state ID card or driver's license and social security card, those are things that are going to be needed for an interview and if there's a job offer. So it's important. Some people keep their social security card, with a different parent, or, maybe it's in a safety deposit box. So getting those things out and ready to go. Having that resume and portfolio ready. And then also having some sample questions. Most interviewers will ask, do you have any questions? So sort of being prepared with those. Sometimes those can really throw off our young adults. So maybe asking, what does a typical work schedule look like, or who would I report to can be helpful. At the interview, practicing sitting and waiting. That is so hard for so many people. But what we don't want to do is we don't want to have our students be sitting and waiting and taking out their phone and playing a game. So sitting and waiting for 15 minutes nervously can be a very hard thing to do. And that would be something to practice. Also, sometimes we think we've done an entire application, but the reality is we get there and there's more forms to fill out. And sometimes if we're not prepared, we will not know what we need to put on those forms. So it could be that you filled out a basic application online, but now our student needs to fill out references or past employers once they get there. So having all of that written down beforehand and bringing it with, also bringing a pen. Again, our students tend to be very technology driven. They're going to have their phone, but they're not going to have a pen. So these are all things we want to create checklists and make sure that we are ready with all of these different, the resume, the cover letter, the references, the pen, all of those things that we're ready and prepared for those interviews. We also want to be prepared for some unexpected possibilities. Once in a while, there might be a writing task. If somebody is applying for a clerical job, there might be a typing test. So those are things to consider. And you can always call, a student can call and ask ahead of time, but these are things that might come up, and it's important to help our students be as prepared for them as possible. Getting prepared for that interview, practicing these things in a classroom, role playing them, really important, practicing interviewing, practicing introductions, practicing the handshake. Again, it's COVID time right now, we're not shaking hands, but practicing how to handle that. And it says here, or have a cover story. So again, in COVID, oh, it's COVID, we're not shaking hands. Fine, nobody's shaking hands. So that's okay. But we're going to need to practice the rest of those pieces, coming into a room, sitting down in a chair, sitting straight in that chair, not leaning on the table, facing the interviewer or the interviewing team, and then making eye contact. And we often talk about that triangle gaze, where if a student or a young adult has trouble making direct eye contact, looking at the top of that person's forehead and then on, the two sides of their face, so that it sort of looks like they're looking at them, but maybe they're not making that direct eye contact, which might be uncomfortable. And then having a pleasant expression at the beginning and the end of the interview. It's always good to start with a smile. But again, these things, it's important to practice, practice, practice. Even that practice coming through the door. It can be hard. Students or adults are walking into a room that is unfamiliar. So you need to know, what happens if that room's really cold? What happens if that room smells weird? We can't just say, okay, it's freezing in here. Can we go to a different room? Students are going to have to, learn some flexibility in order to get through that interview. Some possible interview questions. So these are things, again, that can be practiced, that can be created. Students can look up different interview questions, create these sample interviews, and then practice them with each other. This is a really good classroom activity. After the interview, students need to send thank you notes or a thank you email, and they can have those pre-written and just copy and paste them. So that's something, again, that can be put together in a classroom. A generic, thank you so much for meeting with me today. I look forward to hearing from you soon. Something that's that short and sweet can be very effective. So yay, hopefully that person is hired. And we're going to talk about just in a minute here about vocational rehab and how they can help that person become hired. In order to get a certificate for this training, you have to go to the Eventbrite link that says certificate of completion for this training, and you have to be able to answer the what is the code for the training question. So here is the code. The code is on the screen. It is DJP032021. I'm going to read that again. The certificate code for this training is D as in dog, JP, Jennifer Percival, 032021. So real quick on vocational rehabilitation. Many people have heard of vocational rehab, but if you haven't, vocational rehab is a government program. It helps with people with disabilities obtain and maintain employment. Vocational rehab exists across the country. Every state has a vocational rehab office, and the oversight is done by the federal government. You can see there is a map. If you Google vocational rehab Florida, this map will come up as the office directory, and no matter what county you're in, you can click on that county and the office locations with their phone numbers, addresses will come up. You can see our region here is in orange and blue, Palm Beach County and the Treasure Coast and Okeechobee. So all of those counties are on this map, and they have different units assigned to them. So if you're interested in applying for vocational rehab, you can contact the offices that way, or your school. The schools can help students apply for vocational rehab, specifically pre-employment services. So a lot of the things we talked about today are also available through vocational rehab's pre-employment program, which is called pre-ETS, pre-employment transition services. And these are the types of services that VR will offer over time for our students as they transition from high school to adulthood. Those pre-employment services, later on employment services, where they actually help them find a job, supported employment if they need it, and that's going to be that job coaching and training services as well. So when we talk about sort of drilling down into really more specifically what those services are, so again, we talked about pre-ETS, the pre-employment transition services that the school can help with the referral. Some of those things will include classes on self-determination, classes on that pre-employment prep, resume writing, on-the-job training. So those are some of those pre-employment services. Once they come to employment services, Vocational rehab can help with things like college tuition, job coaching, work clothes, transportation. Those services are individualized, and some of them are based on family income. So those would just be, and it sort of depends, and that's why we're not going kind of more deeply into it. But if you go to VR's website, you can look up which services are based on income and which are not, and sometimes those do change over time. Here is the website for vocational rehab in the state of Florida. It's www.rehabworks.org. Here are also some other websites in Palm Beach County. Career Source is our unemployment office. Palm Beach County Career Source has a disability support department. They've got several staff there that can help individuals with disabilities in their career search. Also, some of these other statewide or national websites that can be useful, the Occupational Network, which talks about what different jobs are and what requirements you need for those jobs, where people are typically hiring for those jobs. And then Florida Choices is a great sort of jobs, sort of exploration website. So there's lots of different opportunities out there. And thank you so much for joining me today. If you have any questions, please feel free to send me an email. I can be reached at jpollock@fau.edu. And I hope that everybody enjoyed the presentation, and reach out to me if you have any questions or need further information. Thank you so much.